everybody, and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Transformers Legacy Voyager class Armada Universe Starscream, and I've been so excited to get my hands on this guy. I think it's our first Armada related figure since Thrilling 30, so definitely an incredibly long time, and I can only hope we can see more of these characters back on the shelves. I know Hotshot's coming out, there's a rumoured Armada leader Megatron, and here's hoping a Commander class Armada Optimus Prime. But let's take a look here at the packaging. So we get a really cool piece of artwork of Armada Starscream in jet mode, some wicked shots of him in robot mode along with the Star Saber, and as we come around to the back, some pretty nifty product shots and the Decepticon Legacy artwork. So with all that being said, us Transformers fans have waited long enough. Let's actually bring Armada Starscream out and see how he stacks up. So here we have Armada Starscream, and overall a very nice recreation of the character, and let's just delve straight into the details. So here we have the head sculpt. Overall, looking really nicely done. I will say I wish they went slightly more expressive with the facial sculpt, but it doesn't look bad. We get these massive dual cannons over the shoulders, and you can actually make them even bigger by taking these sections and collapsing them forward. And this just looks so cool, and the sculpt work on this too actually is really nicely done. So I think that looks great. They are blast effect compatible, so we can smack some of these Energon blasts in there and have Starscream firing away at the Autobots, which I thought was sweet. Now, for those who don't like the look of the cannons, you can not only compress them back, much like we saw in the animation, but you can come around here and actually detach this section and collapse them along the back, which does give you a much better look here at the head as well as the neck brace, which I'll do anyway for articulation. But here we have the wings, very nice sculpt and paintwork on these. I think the chest looks cool. We get this massive elongated nose cone which has been sculpted and painted very nicely. As you guys can see, some nice detailing for the arms and the hands, and just taking a look at the legs, I think for the most part looking really sweet, especially with these fin sections that come out of the kneecaps, and the feet also look pretty cool. Now of course, if you have this section deployed forward as per the animation accuracy, it also does reveal some additional sculpted in detail. And as far as articulation goes, for the most part it's really surprising. So the head, personally I would recommend actually taking these and angling them to the back just to get a good grip of it, but it can look up to an amazing extent, and for a character which can fly, this is awesome. Although if you actually look at it from certain angles, it does appear as if though Starscream doesn't actually have a neck, and it's because they've smacked the ball joint right at the back of the head. So that's not the greatest design in my opinion. It's not terrible, but I do wish it could have been done slightly better. We do get a decent range looking left to right as well as up and down. The shoulders can rotate the full 360, although are slightly hindered by the wings. They can also hinge out to the sides, full rotation at the bicep, double joints here at the elbows due to transformation. Sadly, no form of wrist rotation, which I think is a slight shame, but we do get some wing articulation, so these can be angled to the back, they can be hinged up and down, which is cool. Sadly, they're not detachable, and that would have been really cool to have actually had these create his sword. But with that being said, the wings are merely just held on via a mushroom peg, so I mean, this is the perfect opportunity for an upgrade company such as DNA Design to come up with their own wings for this Armada Starscream, which much like in the animation actually become his sword. So yeah, definitely take advantage of that mushroom peg. I imagine you could even remove it now if you wanted to create for that classic asymmetrical design when Starscream's holding this, although I don't want to risk actually loosening this up, especially if there is going to be an upgrade kit coming out in the near future. Now, something which took me by surprise is that this figure actually has a waist rotation, and considering the shape and design of the nose cone, I thought we were going to write that straight off, but no, he does have a waist rotation, which is really cool. The hips can kick up to an amazing extent as well as can kick back, especially if you actually have these sections flipped forwards, so that's wicked. They can also hinge out to the sides. We do get a rotation at the thigh as well as a slightly past 90-degree bend here out of the knee, and finally the foot can pivot not only forwards and backwards but can also go side to side slightly, although I will say the pin joints in the feet are a little looser than I'd like, so it can make actually standing a little more troublesome than personally I would have expected, but it's not a massive deal breaker, and overall the detailing on this guy is really cool. Now, talking of accessories, as you guys all know, Armada Starscream in the series does actually utilize one of his wings as his main sword, whereas with this figure they've gone slightly lazy and have basically just given us that in the form of an accessory, and it doesn't look the greatest. It basically is just a big grey piece of plastic, and it's very hollow here for the inside. I guess it does the trick. I mean, you could paint this up to make it look a little better, but yeah, it should have been a lot bigger in my opinion as well. It does just slide here into the hand, and then the next accessory accessory we have is the Star Saber. Now the detailing and the paintwork is nice on this, but I think Hasbro missed a massive trick that they could have done with Legacy. For those of you who recall, when we got the first couple of waves of core class, all of them came with this combining weapon gimmick. Now I thought this was pretty pointless for core class, but they could have utilized this to have given us some mini-cons so that eventually when we got around to wave 3, we could have got a proper mini-con Star Saber, as this is pretty dainty in my opinion. It's more of a Star Dagger than a Saber. As you guys can see, it's not much bigger than this, so that is unfortunate. I really think they could have given us some form of combining weapon, but as it stands, I mean, I guess it does the trick, and it can just be slid into the character's hand just like that. Now, turning to some comparisons, here we have the Armada Starscream compared alongside the Earthrise Leader / Voyager Starscream, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, personally, I think this figure is way more substantial in regards to plastic when in comparison here to this new Armada version. That's not to say this is a bad figure, but it definitely does feel considerably lighter than some of our more recent Voyagers, which is slightly unusual, I'm not going to lie, but as you guys can see, definitely in the Voyager class scale, especially being compared alongside the original Starscream. Here we have him alongside the Legacy G2 G-Axis, G2 Leader Class Laser Optimus Prime, Legacy Leader Class Blitzwing, Voyager Class Siege Megatron, Netflix Soundwave, and finally Earthrise Leader Class Optimus Prime. So in all, for robot mode, definitely a fairly nice looking figure. I personally can't say whether or not it's a massive improvement when in comparison to some of the original Armada figures, just as they were sadly slightly before my time, but just in terms of a modern updated Voyager class, this guy's great. I mean, he looks awesome in robot mode, really great articulation, although I do have some issues in regards to his weaponry, and I definitely would have loved for them to have given this guy some wrist rotation. But with all that being said, let's actually get down to the transformation for Armada Starscream. So to kickstart things off, you are going to want to come here to the underside, just detach this section and fold the wrist in. And one thing which I did think was a pretty sweet touch is that the back of the arms has actually been painted to match the outsides. That's something that we don't often tend to see on modern day Voyager figures. We can then do the same here for this side, so just fold that wrist there into the hollow cavity. You'll then want to come around here to the back, take this panel, lift this section up just like this, and now take the wings, rotate those around so that the cutout is fulfilled by the shoulder, and just do the same here for this side. What I would then recommend to do would be to take the nose cone, detach it away from the torso, fold out these fin sections here, and just click it there into place. Now, upon transforming this for the first time, this section can cause a lot of problems, but if you follow the way I'm going to show you, that should hopefully avoid any issues that you may have with this, as it is a separate piece and does have a tendency to dip down. So then what we're going to do is come around to the back, and this slot here will actually be filled via this tab, so just hinge this here all the way up just like that until it does snap into place. That will then allow us to take Starscream's head and dip it down, and as you guys can see, no issues in regards to this. However, if you flip the nose cone up too early, this section will dip, and it's just such a pain in the butt to actually get back out. So then we're going to come here to the legs. I would then recommend to take the heel spurs, collapse those into the feet. We can then angle the legs inwards, take these sections here and flip these open, and as you guys can see, some very nice sculpt work. It kind of looks like Starscream's face, if I'm going to be honest, and do the exact same here for this side. So flip that up. We can then take the foot, snap that there into the hollow cavity, come around to this side, snap this in as well. Now this too can also be slightly fiddly. You're going to want to make sure that this section here does stay like this, as we're actually going to push it past the thigh and then just collapse all of this in and then actually flip it through so that we're left with something which looks like this. Do the same here for this side. However, this time this panel will actually come over the top. So hinge this here in, snap all of that there into place, and then we can just combine the two halves by snapping them into place. Now you're going to want to take the shoulders, slide them here on this pin joint, which for a Voyager I actually thought was really cool, and angle them back and just collapse these double jointed elbows in upon themselves. Do the same here for this side, so slide this section forwards and then just snap all of that in upon itself, and there we have the Legacy Armada Starscream fully transformed up into his pretty cool looking jet mode, and very nicely done. In all, I can't really complain that much. I think it looks pretty darn accurate to Transformers Armada. Now, as we take a closer look at the details, a very nicely painted nose cone. I think the majority of this is actually painted. All of the red you guys can see, as well as the metallic blue over the top. That looks really cool. We now do get these additional fin pieces which stick out to the sides. And in all, very cool. As you guys can see, this is actually painted, whereas this is cast plastic, and I'd say the colour match is near enough spot on. It definitely looks a lot better in person than how it's coming across on camera, and even on camera, doesn't look that bad either. And as you guys can see, we do get the head, which is stowed away into the cavity, as well as these massive cannons, which I guess act as intakes here for jet form. You can bring back in the blast effects and snap them here into the sides and have Starscream jetting away in order to fight and take down Galvatron, or when in battle we can deploy these, flip them forwards and have them blasting away at the Autobots, which I guess is pretty sweet. Of course, if this was an older release, there'd probably be a Mecha Live gimmick or something that would actually automatically deploy them, but we don't get gimmicks like that on modern day figures anymore, so I can't complain that much. Definitely a really sweet looking jet mode. Now, in regards to some weapon storage, there are actually a few ways you can store away the weapons. So you can have them pegged into these MechTech ports on the side of the wings, which is generic for some of these jet formers. We see this all the time with the swords just kind of sticking out to the sides. I personally don't like that look, and luckily there are other ways. So we can take the Star Saber, and as you guys can see, we do get a port and a slot here, which coincidentally perfectly aligns up here with the Star Saber, so we can just snap that in there. Personally, I think that looks way better. And then in regards to the wing sword, basically it does just kind of groove into this tab. It is a very, very loose grip, but it will hold okay. I mean, as you guys can see, it seems to be, or maybe not. I guess you could have it being a drop bomb for Starscream to deploy on his enemies. It was holding in earlier. I don't really think it's specifically designed for this. No, it's not designed for this. Okay, let's just forget about that. But yeah, the Star Saber can stow away here in the nose cone, which I actually think from a bird's eye perspective looks pretty neat. Now, in regards to some comparisons, here we have the Legacy Armada Starscream on the left and the Earthrise Voyager on the right. And as you guys can see, there is a massive difference between the scale of these. The Armada version actually looks like a deluxe in comparison to the Earthrise release, which I wasn't expecting at all. Here he is alongside the G2 Universe G-Axis, and again, definitely a very small Voyager, at least as far as the jet mode goes. And then finally, this big chunky leader class Blitzwing, and I'd say these are roughly more in terms of scale. This Blitzwing does condense down to a pretty squat looking jet, but undercarriage wise, I mean, really and truly, this thing was just caked loads full of tank pieces. But yeah, just so you guys can see how these roughly stack up with one another. Now, just to mention something very quickly, which may or may not affect your copy, it's something that I found on mine, and to be honest, it can be quite irritating here for jet mode. It's that the legs don't really clip in the best. It doesn't take much at all to dislodge them, as it is merely just held in via a friction tab, which at least on mine is way looser than I'd like. As you guys can see, just by moving it, it literally doesn't take much at all to knock it out, and it doesn't even really want to stay into place all that well. So that is definitely something watching out for. I imagine you could maybe tighten up that peg with some floor polish or something, but yeah, I wish there was perhaps a secondary locking mechanism, as that little friction tab just doesn't really appear to be doing the trick. And wrapping up on this review for the Transformers Legacy Voyager class Armada Starscream, in all, it's a very nicely done figure. I think it's great that Hasbro have finally begun to recognise the S in Transformers Generations, as for the longest time it was just strictly G1 based. Armada Starscream looks awesome in robot mode, not too many things to complain about. I think the weapons are the biggest letdown about this release as a whole, especially the Star Saber, one of the most powerful weapons in the history of Transformers, and it looks like a dagger. It really doesn't look that impressive, and had Hasbro just adapted what they were doing in core class, I think we could have been left with a much better looking accessory. Imagine you had to collect all these core class figures which came with an almost mini-con, which when were combined formed this wicked looking Star Saber. Not only would it push sales for Armada Starscream, but it would have created hype, it would have created build up, and I just think that would have been a better idea in my personal opinion. My biggest issue with Starscream when in robot mode is that there's no wrist articulation. I really wish we could have got that, and he does feel considerably lighter when in comparison to some of our more recent Voyagers, but that's not too much of a negative. Transformation is surprisingly fairly simplistic. I mean, it's not too involved I'd say the coolest geek out moment is those sliding pin joints for the shoulders to actually compress them for the jet mode, and the jet mode is what it is. It definitely does resemble what we saw back in the show. I think for the most part they've done a really cool job, so be sure to sound off down in the comment section below for our first Armada figure in what has been, I'd say, roughly 8 years. We're definitely off to a great start, and I cannot wait to see the upcoming Hotshot, Armada Leader Megatron, and hopefully a Commander Armada Optimus Prime. Be sure to sound off down in the comment section below what you guys think of this release. Is it one that you'll be adding to the collection? And until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.